All right, let's dive into something pretty interesting today, and maybe a little taboo, unspoken sexual fantasies.
Ooh, yeah.
We have the Lost Tapes podcast, and we're going to be looking at their content where they got 60 people to share their deepest fantasies.
Anonymously, of course.
Anonymously, of course.
Right.
And, I think this is such a fascinating collection of stories. I don't know, what do you think? I mean, what's your first impression looking at this?
Well, I think it gives us this really unique opportunity to kind of explore what these fantasies reveal about us as people.
Right, and it's not something that people talk about a lot.
Right, exactly.
And so to have this this kind of like peek into this hidden world of desire, I think it's going to be really, really fascinating.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in. When you were looking at the data, what stood out to you about the men's fantasies?
Well, one of the things that that I noticed was how often the theme of control came up.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we hear so much about kind of this traditional masculinity being tied to dominance.
Right.
So it's almost like these fantasies are a way for men to kind of play with those boundaries in a safe space.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. It's like they're testing the waters, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not always about kind of outright dominance. Sometimes it's about exploring those more nuanced dynamics within a power exchange.
Okay.
So, for example, there was one guy, David, who shared his fantasy about being the bad guy in a hero-villain scenario.
Wow, that's interesting.
So, he wants to be the one kind of, in control, but also there's that element of surrendering to it, letting someone else take the reins.
Yeah, there's a vulnerability there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it really highlights the complexity of these desires.
Right. It's not just as simple as wanting to be, dominant or be dominated.
Right.
There's all these other layers there.
Yeah. There's a lot of nuance.
Okay, so we've got control as a major theme. What else was prevalent in the men's fantasies?
Alongside that, there was a strong thread of exploration and novelty seeking.
Okay.
So the desire to kind of experience something outside the norm, to push those boundaries a little bit,
To break free from those societal constraints, even if it's just in the realm of fantasy.
Exactly. So, for example, we heard from Ethan, who was really drawn to the thrill of public exposure.
Public exposure. Okay, so that definitely pushes some boundaries.
Yeah, for sure. And what's interesting is that it's not just about the act itself. It's that, that risk, the potential consequences that add to the excitement.
Yeah. Is there a psychological explanation for that?
There is. I mean, it taps into our primal instincts.
Okay.
That thrill of the unknown, that adrenaline rush that comes with, kind of breaking societal norms.
Right.
And, of course, it's important to remember that we're talking about a fantasy here.
Right, of course.
Not necessarily an indication of actual behavior.
Yeah. Right, we're talking about their inner desires.
Yeah.
Okay, and then there was Alex, who fantasized about being with a much older woman,
Mm-hmm.
which, I mean, that goes against typical societal expectations.
Yeah, and that's precisely what makes it so intriguing. I think, it speaks to this desire for different experiences, a different type of connection, and it challenges those, conventional ideas about age and attraction.
Right. So it seems like even in this small sample of men, we're seeing a pretty wide range of desires.
Yeah.
But they all seem to connect back to this idea of, kind of pushing those boundaries and exploring different facets of themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point to keep in mind as we kind of delve deeper into this topic. Fantasies, even the ones that seem taboo or unconventional, they can often be a way for individuals to kind of explore their own identity, to figure out who they are.
Yeah, to test the waters in their imagination.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've gotten a good look at the men's fantasies, but now I'm curious to see how the women's fantasies compare. Were there any major differences in the themes that emerged?
Yeah, we do see a bit of a shift when we move to the women's fantasies.
Okay.
Control and exploration were certainly present, but they often took on different nuances. Vulnerability, trust, and a yearning for deep emotional connection were much more prominent.
Okay, so it's not that women aren't interested in control or exploration, but those desires might manifest differently.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Okay.
For example, we heard from Emily, who fantasized about reversing roles with her partner and being the one in control.
Okay, so the control element is there, but it's coming from a different place.
Exactly.
Maybe a desire for empowerment or agency rather than like straight dominance.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of her desires and directing the experience. And, it could be interpreted as challenging traditional gender roles, where women are often expected to be more passive.
Yeah. I mean, she's basically saying, I want to be the one calling the shots, at least in this fantasy.
Exactly. And it's not necessarily about power over her partner.
Right.
It's about power over her own experience. And, it's important to remember these are just, individual examples.
Sure.
There's a lot of nuance.
Yeah, of course.
Variation.
Of course.
Within each person's fantasies.
But it's interesting to see how these themes can be interpreted through these different lenses depending on the person.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked about control. What about those themes of trust and emotional connection? How did those manifest in the women's fantasies?
Well, take Sarah, for instance. Her fantasy involved engaging in secret role-playing in public.
Okay.
And, what was intriguing was that the thrill for her wasn't just in the act itself, but in the shared secret, the intimacy and trust it implied with her partner. So that shared knowledge intensifies the experience and creates this deeper level of connection. Exactly. It's about feeling connected to your partner, on multiple levels, not just physically, but emotionally and intellectually as well.
Yeah.
And then you have Amanda, whose fantasy revolved around being pampered and romanced.
Yeah.
In a luxurious setting.
Okay, so this one's less about pushing boundaries and more about seeking a certain kind of experience.
Yeah. It's all about kind of tenderness and care and, emotional intimacy.
So even though these fantasies might seem very different on the surface, they're all tapping into this core desire for connection and fulfillment.
Yeah, I think that's a really great observation.
Yeah.
It highlights just how complex human desire truly is.
It really does. And it makes me wonder, how much of what we fantasize about is influenced by our individual experiences versus like societal expectations. Because it seems like there's this push and pull between those two forces.
Absolutely. And that's something we're going to explore further. But before we get into that, I think it's important to address the fact that talking about fantasies, especially sexual ones, can still be pretty taboo.
Yeah. I mean, it can make us feel ashamed or afraid to even acknowledge those fantasies, let alone share them with someone.
Exactly. And that's where the work of someone like Dr. Marina Richards becomes so important. She argues that fantasies are actually a healthy way to explore, our boundaries and desires. And she even suggests that open communication about them, with mutual consent and comfort, can actually enhance intimacy in relationships.
That's a really interesting perspective because it flips the script on how we typically view those conversations. Instead of being something to be ashamed of, fantasies can actually be a tool for growth and connection.
That's exactly the point she's making.
Okay, so we've got this interplay between personal desires, societal influences, and the potential for growth and connection. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface here.
We definitely have.
Yeah.
And there's so much more to unpack when it comes to navigating these conversations within relationships.
Right.
Yeah.
Because even if we as individuals can come to terms with our own fantasies, bringing them into a relationship requires a whole other level of trust and communication.
It really does.
And I'm really curious to dive deeper into that aspect.
Yeah.
But first, why don't we take a quick break and come back to see how we can create those safe and open spaces for dialogue.
Sounds good.
Dive into the shadows of human nature with the Lost Tapes podcast, where the truths hidden beneath our daily lives are brought to light. We uncover the layers of complex relationships, hidden emotions, and raw realities, from mental health to life's hardest truths. No topic is off limits, no story too raw. The Lost Tapes podcast is your invitation to understand the unspoken facets of life. Join us and let's explore life's hidden sides, one story at a time. Don't miss out on more hidden truths. Subscribe now to the Lost Tapes podcast. Stay curious. Stay informed. Click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon to never miss an episode.
So before the break, we were talking about Dr. Marina Richards and her perspective on fantasies.
Yeah, and how being open can actually make relationships stronger.
Right. It is a really powerful idea.
But I mean, I can imagine it's easier said than done
Yeah.
for a lot of couples.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, even just bringing up the topic can be like walking on eggshells.
You can be.
Yeah.
And that's where all those societal taboos, they can really get in the way.
Right.
If we think that certain desires are, wrong or shameful,
Right.
it makes it hard to share them, even with someone you trust and love.
It really is. Like, we're fighting years of being told to keep those desires hidden, sometimes even from ourselves,
Exactly. And then that fear of being judged leads to secrets, which can, push couples apart and, really damage the relationship.
So if we know that open communication is like the key, how do we actually break free from all that and create a space where you can actually talk honestly about this stuff?
Well, the first step is challenging those beliefs about what's acceptable to even want.
Okay.
Dr. Richard, she really emphasizes that these fantasies are a normal and healthy part of being human. They're just a way to explore boundaries and desires without actually acting on them.
Right. It's like giving yourself permission to be curious, to let your mind wander a little.
Exactly.
And to understand that having a fantasy doesn't mean you have to actually do it.
Exactly. Yeah. And once we've done that for ourselves, then we can start thinking about how to bring these conversations into our relationships.
Okay, that still feels pretty daunting, I gotta say. I mean, you're not just gonna blurt out your deepest fantasy like over dinner one night, right?
Right. You're right. It does take some finesse. It's about making both partners feel comfortable and safe where they feel heard.
So start small.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe you share something a little lighthearted, something funny to break the ice. Keep it playful.
And then if everyone's okay with it, you can gradually go deeper over time.
Yeah. Let it happen organically. And remember, it goes both ways. It's about sharing your own fantasies, but also being open to hearing your partners.
Right. And respecting their boundaries, of course.
Exactly. Because you're not trying to pressure anyone into anything they don't want to do.
Right. It's all about building trust.
Exactly. And if you can do that, create that kind of space, these conversations can really bring couples closer together.
Because you're sharing a really private part of yourself. And
Yeah.
that can create a deeper connection, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even if you never actually do anything you talk about, even just talking about it can be a way of exploring your desires, your fears, all of it together.
It's almost like saying to your partner, this is me, and I trust you enough to share this with you.
Yeah, it's powerful. It creates a deeper sense of intimacy and understanding.
So we've talked a lot about open communication, but, not everyone is going to be comfortable sharing, even with their partner.
Absolutely. It's important to respect those boundaries.
Right.
Not everyone is comfortable talking about, such personal things.
Yeah, for sure. But what about those who are curious, who want to explore their fantasies, but they're not in a relationship, or maybe they're just not ready to share?
Well, there are safe and healthy ways to do that. Other ways,
Like what, writing erotic stories or something?
That's one way.
Yeah.
Writing can be really empowering and, cathartic.
Yeah.
Allows people to explore on their own terms without being judged,
Right.
without fear of repercussions.
It's like creating your own world
Right.
where you can kind of explore freely,
Exactly. And for some people, that's all they need.
right?
It's about finding what works for you and what feels good.
And if someone does want to share, but they're feeling a little nervous, any tips on how to start that conversation?
Well, first of all, pick a good time
Okay.
when you're both relaxed.
Okay.
Timing is everything.
Right. So not like in the middle of a crazy week or when your family's about to come over, right?
Exactly. And start by saying you want to share something personal. See how they react. Let them know you're not asking them to do anything, but that you just want to talk.
Setting the stage for a real, honest conversation.
Exactly. And it's a journey, not a destination. You don't have to share everything at once. Start slow. Build that trust.
So it sounds like what we're really getting at is the importance of being vulnerable and trusting each other.
You got it. And that's not just for this, that's the basis for any good relationship.
Right. Being able to share your true self.
Yeah.
Even the parts you might want to hide
Absolutely.
is really important for connection.
It is.
All right, so we've talked about a lot here. From individual psychology to relationships to society. What should our listeners take away from all of this?
I think the biggest thing is that fantasies are normal. They're healthy and they're natural. They give us a look into our desires, our fears, ourselves really.
Yeah.
And whether we explore them alone or with a partner or even just acknowledge them, they can teach us a lot about ourselves. and our relationships.
It's not about judging
Right.
ourselves or others
Right.
for what we fantasize about.
Exactly.
It's about understanding that those desires are part of us. And if we embrace that, we can become more self-aware and connect better with others.
Absolutely. And this is just the beginning of the conversation.
Right.
There is still so much more to explore about desire and how our inner world and society interact and affect each other.
Yeah, it's definitely something we'll come back to in future episodes. But for now, I want to leave everyone with something to think about. We've talked about how society shapes our understanding of fantasies, but how has that affected you, the listener? Have you ever questioned your own desire or felt like you had to hide them? Or have you found ways to challenge those ideas and embrace who you are?
It's something to really think about.
Because ultimately, this is all about understanding yourself, embracing what you want, and creating a world where we can all just be ourselves without fear. So think on that, and until next time, keep diving deep, keep exploring, and keep talking about it.
Happy exploring.
We've really gone deep on these unspoken fantasies, haven't we?
Yeah, it's like we've peeled back all those layers of what we're supposed to think and got to the real stuff underneath.
Right, and it makes you wonder, what even is normal when it comes to desire?
Right. Who gets to decide that anyway?
Exactly.
That's the big question. And I think it's something we're all starting to think about more openly these days, like as a society.
Yeah, it feels like we're realizing there's no one right way to have fantasies, and that's a good thing.
Exactly. And I think understanding, like the science of desire, all that psychology stuff, that's key. The more we know, the better we can get rid of those old stereotypes and just talk honestly.
So it's not just about exploring our own fantasies, it's about making it okay for everyone to talk about.
Exactly. Can you imagine a world where it's as normal to talk about fantasies as it is to talk about, like, what movies you like?
That'd be amazing. No more shame, no more hiding. People could finally be free.
Right.
But I gotta be honest, that feels a little far off right now with all those taboos we talked about.
It might take time, but I'm hopeful. I think we're heading in the right direction. If we keep these conversations going, share our stories, challenge those old ideas, we can get there.
And maybe even have some fun doing it.
Oh, for sure.
Because fantasies can be fun, exciting, they can even make you more creative, right?
Absolutely. It's all about being curious and playful.
Well said. So I think that about wraps up our deep dive into unspoken fantasies. Hope you all learned something new and maybe even feel a little more free to explore your own desires.
Me too. It's been great talking about all this with you and everyone listening.
Before we go, one last thing to think about. We've talked a lot about how society tells us what's okay to fantasize about. But how has that affected you? Has it made you question your own desires, made you hide them?
That's a really good question to think about.
Because this isn't just about fantasies, is it? It's about knowing yourself, being okay with what you want, and making the world a place where everyone can be themselves. So take some time with that thought, and until next time, keep exploring and keep the conversation going.
Happy exploring, everyone.
Dive into the shadows of human nature with the Lost Tapes podcast, where the truths hidden beneath our daily lives are brought to light. We uncover the layers of complex relationships, hidden emotions, and raw realities, from mental health to life's hardest truths. No topic is off limits, no story too raw. The Lost Tapes podcast is your invitation to understand the unspoken facets of life. Join us and let's explore life's hidden sides, one story at a time. Don't miss out on more hidden truths. Subscribe now to the Lost Tapes podcast. Stay curious. Stay informed. Click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon to never miss an episode.